This average Joe worked as a painter in Salt Lake City for over 30 years. However, in 2001, he would soon make national headlines across the United States for taking the lives of 49 confirmed victims. Today, we're going to deep dive into the case of Gary Ridgway, better known as the Green River Killer. Gary Ridgway gave the appearance of being a normal family man, holding his home life together quite well. From the outside, he was a well-respected member of society who did everything he could to contribute to his community. However, in reality, Gary was the living embodiment of everything that was tearing his community apart. It would take police more than 15 years to catch this cold-blooded killer who always seemed to be one step ahead of investigators. Gary Ridgway was born in Salt Lake City, Utah on February 18, 1949. He has kept most of his childhood private, but both he and investigators have revealed a few key details about what could have caused this seemingly innocent child to spiral out of control after becoming an adult. Gary was the second son of Mary and Thomas Ridgway, making him the middle child. According to the people around him and his family members, he didn't exactly have an easy childhood while he was growing up. His parents did the best they could to keep their relationship together, but that didn't bode well for the children, who would often witness violent fights between the two parents. To top things off, Gary said that his father was always complaining about how many street workers there were in their hometown. Thomas Ridgway had been a bus driver for many years, so he knew the city inside and out. That meant he knew all about the less than desirable areas that had begun to pop up over the years. At the time, Salt Lake City had a serious problem with prostitution, and Thomas was very outspoken about this. It seems that Gary likely adopted some of his resentment later on in life, but we will just get to all of that in a moment. When speaking with investigators, he came clean about his bedwetting issues he had while growing up. Though, what was truly traumatic about these experiences for Gary was that his mother would take things a bit too far and forced him to allow her to clean his genitals every time he wet the bed. Gary said that over the years, he began to have conflicting feelings about his mother. He said that these occurrences caused him to feel a deep hatred for her, yet also a profound attraction that he could not explain. He would also admit much later in life that he had frequently fantasized about killing her, but could never bring himself to do it. As Ridgway grew up, he would quickly learn that he was not on par with other kids in high school. It seems that Gary would struggle greatly in many of his classes, and a doctor would diagnose him as dyslexic at some point during his childhood. His grades were so bad that he was eventually held back for a year in high school, forcing him to be separated from his friends that he had grown up with for so many years. A mental health professional would later inform Gary's parents that his mental capacity was far behind other students with his age, with him having an IQ in the lower 80s. It was around this time that Gary committed his first serious crime. That being, when Gary was 16, he lured a very young boy into the woods. Once the two were alone, Gary, who was 10 years older, decided to attack the boy with a sharp object. The attack led the boy to sustaining liver damage, but he managed to survive and make a full recovery. When speaking to the police, the boy said that Gary walked away laughing after the attack. It doesn't seem like he faced any major consequences for this action, though. There's no doubt that this is where Gary's psychopathic tendencies began to unravel. Gary managed to graduate from high school in 1969, despite the many setbacks he faced throughout his teenage years. By the time he was 20, Gary had proposed to his high school girlfriend. The two were married soon after and began their life together. However, Gary would soon have other plans for his life, plans that did not involve his newfound wife, Claudia. He went on to tell Claudia that he wanted to join the Navy. He claimed that he did this in order to not get drafted, but it seems more likely that he simply wanted to get away from the city and people that had caused him so much pain over the years. Before long, he was accepted into the military and left his wife at his hometown. It was around this time that Gary realized that his libido was off the charts. He would make sexual advances on women multiple times a day while he was enlisted. Wherever he happened to be situated at this time, Gary admitted to having countless affairs with prostitutes. Gary described his sexual drive as insatiable, and this would later be confirmed by several of his ex-girlfriends and all of his future ex-wives. While he was in the military, Gary says that he contracted an STD for the second time, which caused him to become incredibly angry. However, despite this, he continued to carry on with his usual activities, refusing to use protection. Gary didn't mention if his wife back home knew about him having multiple affairs while he had gone in the military. Before long, Claudia had started dating again, and in less than a year, the two filed for divorce. Gary would conclude his time in the military in the early 1970s. Just a few years after his divorce had been finalized, Gary decided to begin dating again and soon met a young woman named Marcia. The two hit it off immediately and began a long-lasting relationship together. They were married by 1973, and by 1975, they gave birth to their first son named Matthew. It was around this time that Gary became a religious fanatic. Marcia says that he devoted every free moment of his day to reading the Bible and quoting scripture. He would even go door to door and read the Bible to neighbors and people in the community. He would take his Bible with him to read at work as well, with his coworkers saying he would often read aloud so that everyone could hear him. However, it's also possible that it was all simply a cover-up to hide his secret desires of murder from those around him. He seemed to be deeply remorseful about something, but no one knew what it was. She would explain to officers that Gary's sex drive was relentless. She said that he would often try to convince her to do the deed in all sorts of places, often opting to do it in public. Police would later find out that many of the locations where he requested to do these activities would be the very same place where his victims would be found years later. Despite the obvious problems in their marriage, Marcia explained that the one problem that was ultimately a deal breaker for her was that he had a strange dedication to his mother. She said that his mother controlled every aspect of their lives. She would control their finances, would check in on Gary multiple times a day, and would invite herself into their marriage, causing serious issues for the couple. Marcia said that his mother was so far out of control that she would even pick out Gary's clothes for him. As you probably expected, the relationship between Gary and Marcia did not end well, and the two divorced after 7 years together. After leaving the relationship, Marcia would explain that Gary occasionally became violent during their disagreements and even placed her in a chokehold at one point. Even after all of this, Gary would continue to date and would do the best he could to find a partner that he could be with for the rest of his life. He began attending meetings for Parents Without Partners. Here, he met several women that he took a liking to, and he began dating Judith Mawson after a few months. Judith adored Gary. It seems that she understood that Gary struggled with certain daily tasks like managing money. She didn't pressure Gary the same way that Marcia did. By all means, these two seemed perfect for one another. They would eventually move in together, but before doing so, Gary went to the extent of completely remodeling their home from top to bottom so that Judith would eventually walk into a brand new home on her first day at the house. However, all of this was nothing more than a facade from a deeply disturbed man. Before long, things would begin to go downhill in a way that no one would have expected. It would be July of 1982 when a body was found floating in the Green River. The victim was found to have been 16-year-old Wendy Lee Caulfield. Wendy had lived a troubled young life before an unknown assailant violently took her life with her own panties, wrapping them around her neck and then tossing her into the river. When police found her, they realized the killer had left no evidence whatsoever. Because of this, the case ran cold and her assailant was given the nickname the Green River Killer.